Welcome to Jackie's Craft Table. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I hope you're all having a lovely day. In this video, I'm card crafting with Simon Says Stamps May Card Kit. It's called Delicate Flowers. And this one is a beauty. The stamp set is also called Delicate Flowers, and it's just filled with beautiful floral images. You also get some washi tape. I don't use washi tape that often, but I sure had fun with it. You get some pearlescent alcohol inks. I don't have any of these in my stash, so I was very excited to play with them. And a small bottle of alcohol blending solution. You have to really give these a good shake before you use them because all of the glitter settles at the bottom. The colors are Sublime, Intrigue, and Tranquil. They sound very intriguing, but they are a lot of fun to play with. In each kit, you always get a few envelopes. This pattern paper is from Moda Scrap, and I'm a big fan of theirs. Their pattern paper is always just gorgeous. These are very painterly looking papers, and they're single-sided. I'm just going to flip through them for you. The images and colors are also delicate and pretty. You almost want another set just to keep. It's hard to cut into it sometimes. You get 2 sheets of alcohol ink cardstock, and this is called Silver Sparkle. 2 sheets of Yupo paper. This sheet lists the contents of your kit and gives you some fun examples. And for the cardstock, you get cotton candy, green leaf, and some white. I'm going to do a really fun technique for card number 1. I'm stamping right onto the pattern paper. I really loved this piece of paper because it has pretty colors on it and it looks like it's been watercolored. Stamping out one of the flowers onto it with some VersaFine Onyx Black ink. I'm also going to stamp out a mask for it. I want to stamp some leaves behind it, and this will protect my flower and make the leaves look like they're behind it and underneath it. And this is just a piece of full back sticky note paper. There are a lot of different leaf stamps in this set. They're all so different. They were fun to play with. I'm going to use a few of them on this card. So the technique I'm using on this card is coloring right over your pattern paper with colored pencils. I'm using Polychromos pencils, and I chose colors that matched the pattern paper really well. I'm starting out with these purpley pink pencils. I'll have all of the colors listed over on my blog. And I'm not coloring in the whole flower. I'm just putting down some shadows, the bottom of each petal. And then I'm adding some of the colors that you see throughout the pattern paper. I'm adding some yellows in this flower, just to give it a little added interest. I'm also going to add some pink in the leaves, just to extend the pink into the green parts of the paper. Off camera, I do add more leaves around the flower. It just looked a little too sparse. These leaves I'm coloring in with a brown, pinkish brown color and adding pink at the tips. This is a really fun technique to do, and it gives you really beautiful results. So give it a try if you haven't. For my largest flower, I also drew in a stem with my black Copic multiliner. You'll see this in the next shot. I cut out a faux stitched frame to put around my flowers, and I already heat embossed my sentiment with white embossing powder, but I felt it just got kind of lost on this card. So I'm covering that up with another sentiment, which I heat embossed on a piece of black cardstock. I used the cotton candy cardstock for my card base. And then I'm going to put some foam squares behind my sentiment to give it a little cute dimension. Then I can just clip off the overhang of the sentiment. For a bit of sparkle on my card, I'm adding some iridescent bubbles. These are from Studio Katya. And it was kind of challenging not to put more on the card, but here it is, all finished. Then, of course, I had to use more of the pattern paper on the inside. Another of my favorites from the pattern paper pack was this cool brown cardstock. Just thought it was so pretty. I'm using a second piece of pattern paper to cut out some of the flowers with a square die. I'm stamping 3 different sentiments on the front of this card. I didn't glue down the squares yet. They're just taped down temporarily. I'm going to remove them so that I can stamp out my sentiments. I don't want to accidentally get any ink on those. And I am going to heat emboss them, so I'm using my anti-static powder first, and then some VersaFine Onyx Black ink, which stays wet long enough for you to pour over your embossing powder. Now I can pull this out and pour on some clear embossing powder. I'm just using a piece of type paper to catch the excess, and I can just funnel that back into my bottle. I'm being very careful not to warp this paper, so I just bring my heat tool onto it for a second and then take it off. I did really good this time. It didn't hardly warp at all. I'm going to add this panel onto a white card base. That looks so cute. Now I can add my squares. I put some foam squares behind them for added dimension. And then I can just attach them to the front of my card. And this card says, "Hello friend, adore you, miss you." And then I'm going to tie a little bow. It just needed something more. And so I'm using some twine. And I wrapped it right around the card base and everything, because I wanted to use some of the cute washi tape, and I'm going to show you how I ended up using that. So I'm just ripping it off roughly, and then I'm going to tape down my twine so it stays put, and I think that's just a cute touch for the inside of the card. And as usual, I added more pattern paper on the inside, and one I cut out with a heart die. Okay, on card number 3, I'm doing another fun technique. I'm going to stamp out some more flowers on some Kraft cardstock, and this is Desert Storm. I'm just pulling that from my stash. And I'm going to use my gel pens to color these in. So I'm going to stamp up a few more flowers. There's so many flowers from this stamp set to choose from. Lately, VersaFine Onyx Black ink is my ink of choice. It gives you such a dark, crisp line. Now I can remove my masks and start in on the coloring. So I'm using gel pens that kind of match the washi tape, and I'm not coloring the whole petal in. I'm just doing a smear technique, for a better term for it. So I put down some ink, and then right away you just want to swipe it with your finger and blend it out, or pull out the color, I should say. And it just gives you kind of a cute, artsy look. The gel pens really look nice on this Kraft cardstock, nice and bright. The ink from the gel pen washes off your fingers very easily. I just used a baby wipe to clean my fingers. I didn't want to get any red on these green leaves. And I'm using 2 colors of green for these leaves just to add some shadows. Then I'm coming back in with kind of a cream colored pencil, but it didn't show up very well. I used this technique on a fall time card last year, and I'll link to that at the end of this video. I put a strip of washi tape on the side of my card, and you can see the leaves through the washi tape. It is kind of thin. I'm stamping down the sentiment with more black ink. This one just says, "Thanks for always being there." I did wish that this stamp set came with more birthday sentiments, because it seems like I'm always in need of birthday cards. But I guess you could always use your own sentiment stamps if you wanted to make birthday cards. I just wanted to mostly use what was in the kit. I'm using my corner chomper to round the edges on the side of this card. And now I'm coming in with my gel pen glitter pen. This puts down a lot of glitter. Once I hold it up in the light, you'll be able to see it really well, but I'm just putting it mostly on the tips of these flowers. And I'm just smearing that around. And I hope you can see that a little bit. In person, it's really sparkly. I like the font on this Thanks because I like being able to color it in with the colors I used on my flowers. And then I thought the card needed a little more added interest, so I'm just putting some cute little dots around my flowers in both the green and the red. And then I'm using a piece of poppy red cardstock from MFT, and this is from my stash, but it just matched so well with the washi tape and the gel pens. Here's a close-up look at my finished card. This is another fun technique you should try if you haven't. On the inside, I just simply put another strip of washi tape. On my next card, I am mostly using just pattern paper. The pattern paper from this kit can really carry off a card all on its own. It was so pretty. So I stamped my sentiment onto this heart die. And I'm going to heat emboss it with some clear embossing powder just to make it a little bit shiny. Being careful again to melt that without warping my paper. This is a piece of the green leaf cardstock, and I'm attaching that to a white card base. I can just trim away a little bit of the white card base that was showing around the edge. And then I'm using a Prismacolor pencil to color in my sentiment. This was another beautiful piece of the cardstock. I just love the bright oranges and pinks and greens on this. And then I cut off the strip at the bottom from the same piece of cardstock, and I'm just going to add it to the side of my card. And I can just cut off the excess. I'm attaching my sentiment onto my card with a silver cord. And I want it to run long ways, so I'm using my Kraft pick just to puncture a hole in the middle of this card. And then I can just push my cord through. And then I'm going to tie a little bow on the side. To keep the heart in place, I'm adding some foam squares behind it. I found this was easier to do before I tied the bow. It just held it in place for me. Now I can tie the bow much easier. I thought the silver looked really pretty with these pinks and oranges on the pattern paper. I just want it to be a teeny tiny bow, and then I can cut off the excess. And then to hold it in place, I'm just doing the same thing. I'm just adding a piece of washi tape. I think that just looks so charming on the insides of these cards. I'm adding a few confetti sequins across this panel. And that finishes off the card. Here's a peek at the inside. I'm having a ball with this washi tape. I don't have a lot in my stash, but whatever they put in these kits, I try to use up. Okay, moving right along. I'm going to do some watercoloring on this panel. I'm going to completely cover this panel by stamping out this one particular stamp. This stamp lends itself well to this kind of a technique. Because this stamp shows you the image straight on, the flower petals overlap each other really well when you do continuous stamping like this. So this is going to be my focal image that I masked right here. And I am going to stamp some leaves behind it, just a few. Masking does take a little bit of time, but it's so fun to do. And the result is just gorgeous. I'm using more Post-it paper for my masks. I like these because the back of it is full coverage stick. So I have to cut out all of these leaves separate, and it does take some time. Once my focal image is protected by the masks, I can do more stamping. Then I can just move the masks as I need. I cut out a few more of the flower. The sticky note paper is nice to use because you can cut out more than one mask at a time. The paper I'm using is Arches cold pressed water paper. It's a little bit rough. You have to sometimes stamp it down several times just to get a good impression. Then I can just shift my masks. You don't have to cut out a mask for each flower. Looks kind of chaotic now, but once I color it in, it's going to look really pretty, and you'll see where I'm going with this. I'm using an aqua brush to paint my flowers, and this is nice because it has water in the tube. The cleanup is easy between colors because I just wipe it off on a paper towel. And these are a few Daniel Smith watercolors I'm using. I do wish that I had taped this panel down completely because it did warp, and I think if I would have taped all four sides down, it would have saved me on warpage. You can't quite see the leaves until I start painting them, and then they look so pretty over the other flowers, and I'm just going to leave those black and white. I'm going to put that aside to dry and work on my sentiment. I'm going to stamp that on a piece of black cardstock. I'm using some sticky Versamark ink to stamp this. And this just says "Thinking of You" in a very beautiful font. And then I can pour over my white embossing powder and melt that with my heat tool. I'm using another piece of the green leaf cardstock to mat my flower panel. And I cut that down to be a little bit smaller than my card base. I'm also using a piece of orange cardstock to put behind my flowers. And I'm just gluing everything down flat with my dot liner. There, I think that looks so cute, all of the different colors behind it. The sentiment I'm propping up with more foam squares. I didn't want to cover my flower, so I'm just going to put that up at the top and cut off the excess. I found these old sequins that I've had in my stash forever. They're from Pretty Pink Posh, and they're called Marigold and Tangerine. They just helped to pull out the color onto the rest of the panel. And here is a look at the inside. I stamped another sentiment and used up some scraps of cardstock. On card number 6, I'm using my favorite Stonehenge colored pencil paper. I absolutely love this paper for my colored pencil work. It just blends out beautifully, and it's rough enough that it'll pull the pigment off of your colored pencils. I'm going to stamp out this flower bud and some leaves a few times. And I pulled out more colored pencils that match this pattern paper that you see in the top left corner. I'm using a white colored pencil just to kind of burnish the colors together and make it look smooth. I wanted to get a really smooth look, so I do end up pulling out my odorless mineral spirits, it's called Gamsol, to blend these colors a little more. I like to put down a lot of layers with my colored pencils if I know I'm going to be using my Gamsol. The Gamsol helps to break down your colored pencils and kind of moves the colors around. But if you don't have enough colored pencil on your work, the pigment doesn't get into the valleys of the paper, and it leaves these speckles behind that show up more when you use the Gamsol. So use lots of layers for a nice, creamy, smooth look to your work. Next, I'm going to fussy cut these leaves and flowers. This is where I wish I had the coordinating die for this. I won't make you watch the whole thing. I must say I am getting a little bit better with all the practice I get. I don't always buy coordinating dies just to save on money, so I do a lot of fussy cutting. For my sentiment, I'm going to stamp out the one that says "Thinking of You Again." I'm stamping this onto a piece of the green patterned paper that I cut out with an oval die. I'm going to adhere that to another oval die cut. I'm going to make kind of a little wreath with all of these flowers and leaves. I'm propping up my sentiment with some foam tape. And then I can just glue on the flower buds and the leaves around this oval. Using some Gina K Connect glue to adhere these onto this oval. I'm using an odd number of flowers and leaves, which is more pleasing to the eye when you're putting together your cards. I'm going to adhere some right onto the pattern paper. So this gives it a little bit of dimension. Next, I'm adding some enamel dots around this panel. These are just different sizes and colors of green. I really love these pre-made enamel dots. I keep a bunch in my stash. I don't have a lot of the Nouveau drops, which are fun, but it would be hard to store all of the bottles in my tiny craft room. And here is a look at the finished card. On the inside, I stamped another rosebud and leaf and colored those in with my colored pencils. They worked really good on the green paper too. Now we're up to card number 7, and I wanted to do more colored pencil work on this card. So I'm going to stamp out some more greenery and flowers on this little oval that I cut out with some black cardstock. I'm stamping it out with some Versamark ink and pouring over more white embossing powder. Colored pencils on black cardstock is another fun technique to try. The colored pencils just pop off of the black cardstock. You don't even have to use the embossing powder if you don't want to. You could just use white pigment ink. I didn't take the time to mask this piece, so I'm just brushing away some of the white embossing powder where I don't want it. And then I can melt that with my heat tool. I'm using the same polychromos colored pencils that I used on my last card. I'm pressing down a little bit harder on this image than I did the last one, just to make the colors really pop off of this black cardstock. I'm kind of burnishing it as I go. But look how gorgeous these colors are on this cardstock. So pretty. And it doesn't take much time to color this in at all. It does kind of look disjointed, but I'm going to cover that up with a sentiment and a bow. I'm using some of the pink pattern paper, and I misstamped on that, but I didn't want to waste it, so I'm just going to cover up that side with another scrap of pattern paper. I'm using the lines on my grid just to make sure these papers are straight. And then I cut it down to be 5 1/4 by 4 so that the white of the card base can peek through the edges. I'm using some foam tape behind my oval to pop it up off my card. And I'm using my Kraft pick just to peel off the release paper. It really helps. Now I can center that. I'm using a glue dot to put behind this bow that I tied with some twine. This will hide the flower stem that's kind of disjointed. I'm going to cut out the sentiment with a faux stitched banner die. I thought I'd do this on white cardstock this time, so it will contrast with the black cardstock. I love these faux banner stitch dies. I use these a lot. I'm going to glue that right over my oval panel So I used some glue as well as a little bit of foam tape so that it's the same height as the oval. I do move the bow down because I just thought it looked a little strange there. And I put some pearls to hide the imperfections of my stamping. I used some more strips of black cardstock to cover my seams, and then some more scraps of cardstock on the inside. Now it's time to play with the pearlescent alcohol inks. I'm just giving those a good shake. And I'm using a piece of the silver sparkle cardstock. It doesn't show well on camera, but these have an amazing amount of sparkle to it. So it was just mesmerizing to sit here and watch these alcohol inks blend and move and sparkle. I don't want to cover the whole panel. I just want a little bit of color. And I'm trying to blend it so that there's purple in the middle. When you put down the alcohol blending solution, it makes it kind of silver again. It was just fun to play with this. It looks gorgeous. So I put that aside to dry. On another piece of the silver sparkle paper, I'm going to stamp out this beautiful flower that I haven't used yet with some VersaFine Onyx Black ink. I'm being very careful with my Copic markers not to get them into the lines of my stamping because it will pick up the ink. So I'm being very careful, but these alcohol markers blend really well on this paper. So I'm using a really bright pink and a really soft pink, but you'll see that they blend just beautifully together where they wouldn't on regular cardstock. This was just fun to try. I'd never tried this before. This flower is going to be multicolored to match the colors on my ink blended panel. And I'm not even coloring in all of the patterns. I want some of the silver to show through. A few times I did get ink on my marker nibs, but I just scribble it out on a piece of scrap paper and it comes clean. And once that is dry, I'm going to fussy cut it out. I'm going to leave a border of the silver paper around my flower. I'm trying not to touch the flower too much because it's still a little bit wet and I don't want to smudge it. Card base is made of vellum, and it's a really nice thick vellum that you can get from My Favorite Things. And I'm just gluing my panel right onto the vellum. And then I'm going to pop up my flower with some foam squares. On the inside, I glued down another piece of white cardstock so that I could write my message. You could also use another piece of white cardstock to cover the inside of your card so you can't see all of the glue. On card number 9, I'm using the green and blue alcohol inks on a piece of the Yupo paper that I cut down. I could have done this all day. It was just fun and mesmerizing to see these colors drip around this paper. I wasn't quite sure where I was going with this other than I wanted it to be mostly green. And now I can start adding the blue. And I'm using the alcohol blending solution too, just to make it move around a little more. Mostly I was just having fun, but I liked the blue and green drips. So I'm letting that drip down the edge of this paper. I have to keep shaking up these bottles to get the pearlescence to activate. And then I can set this aside to dry. I'm using some large faux stitch banner dies to cut out some banners from both of these papers. I'm not doing much more to this card because these beautiful papers can really carry off a card all on their own. So I dipped into my stash for another piece of green cardstock to put behind these banners. I was going to use this as the card base, but I end up cutting it off and then cutting it down to 5 1/4 by 4. I do this process off camera. And now I can add it to just a white card base, and I think this looks a lot better. I like to see the white border of the card base. I'm using a few gems from Hero Arts. I've had this in my stash for a few years. And the brightness of the gems just matches so well with the alcohol blended cardstock. I used more scraps on the inside and a little bit of washi tape at the top. I'm going to use just the leaves from the stamp set on card number 10. I'm stamping them onto a piece of green cardstock from my stash. I ran out of the green leaf paper pretty fast. So I am cheating a little bit here. I really like to just limit myself to what's included in the card kit. I'm coloring in these leaves to match the pattern paper that you see on the right. And again, I'm pressing down pretty hard so that it stands out from the green cardstock. My card base is made from cotton candy cardstock. And I cut out a little piece of vellum to put behind these leaves so that they can be differentiated from the pattern paper a little bit more. So I just slapped down some more washi tape to adhere these leaves to the front of my card. I'm really loving this washi tape. Then I added my sentiment and another twine bow. Really love how simple and fun this card turned out. I hope you all were inspired by some of these cards, and I hope you get a chance to sit down and create something fabulous today. Thank you so much for watching. I want to say washi tape. Watching my crafty friends. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.